Chapter 11. Bathsheba, the Beautiful. Hearken unto me now therefore, O ye children, and attend the words of my mouth. Let not thine heart decline to her ways, go not astray in her paths. For she hath cast down many wounded, yea, many strong men have been slain by her. Proverbs 7:24-26. It was springtime and Israel was at war with the Ammonites. David should have been out on the battlefield, but he made the mistake of staying home. One day David was taking a little stroll, and from the roof he saw a woman washing herself, and the woman was very beautiful to look upon. 2 Sam 11:2. Not satisfied with just looking, he invited her up to his apartment. The woman's name was Bathsheba, and she accepted the invitation. It was a Hollywood romance, love at first sight, and it didn't stop until after it reached the bedchamber. In that fateful moment, David made a tragic mistake in his spotless character, an event that troubled him the rest of his life. This close encounter resulted in the pregnancy of Bathsheba, but she was already married to a soldier named Uriah, who was out on the battlefield. To cover his sin, David called for Uriah to come home, but he was a devoted soldier who wouldn't sleep with his wife, while his brothers were fighting in battle. David then added sin to sin by sending Uriah to the front line of battle with orders for the soldiers to retreat, leaving Uriah to the mercy of the Ammonites. When news of Uriah's death came back to David, he made public notice that he was taking Bathsheba to be his wife. He thought his nefarious deed was well covered. It was to the Israelites, but not to God. Nathan, the prophet, came to King David with a problem. He related this story. There were 2 men in a city, one was rich, the other poor. The rich man had exceedingly many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing, save one little ewe lamb. Now when he wanted to take a lamb to dress it, he desired not to take of his own flock, but took the poor man's lamb. David's anger was greatly kindled against the rich man, and he said to Nathan, As the Lord liveth, the man that hath done this thing shall surely die. Then Nathan said to David, Thou art the man. See 2 Sam 12:1-7. Then David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. There are several things to consider in David's affair with Bathsheba. It is important for us to understand what was legal and what was illegal. 1. Remorse. When David committed his sin with another man's wife, he suffered agony of mind and torment in his soul. Nowhere did he suffer any remorse or sorrow for his polygamous relationships. Polygamy was legal and proper, but his intercourse with Bathsheba was a heinous sin. 2. Rebuke. For his hidden sin of adultery, a prophet of God immediately came and rebuked him for the deed. In all the years that David lived polygamy, none of the prophets ever mentioned it to him as a sin. 3. Curses. When David committed adultery, God immediately put a curse on him and his house. 1. A. The child born of this illegal intercourse was struck dead by the Lord. 1. B. The Lord pronounced a curse upon David for his adultery, by saying that the sword shall never depart from thine house, and I will raise up evil against thee out of thine own house. The later rape and incest of his daughter, Tamar, was part of it. Then the murder of his son, Ammon, and the death of his son, Absalom, was further evidence. As though this were not enough, David sang a song in which he pled with the Lord to heal the bones which thou hast broken, and that he may hide thy face from my sins. Psalms 51:8-9. David never had any such things happen to him because of all the women he took as wives. 4. Sons and bastards. A definite distinction is made between a child acceptable through a polygamous marriage and another born in sin. David's child that was born in adultery was destined to die, in spite of all the prayers and pleadings of David. The law in Israel was that a bastard shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord, even to his 10th generation. Deut. 23:2. And the Lord struck the child that Uriah's wife bare unto David, and it was very sick. David therefore besought God for the child, and David fasted, and went in, and lay all night upon the earth. And the elders of his house arose, and went to him, to raise him up from the earth. But he would not, neither did he eat bread with them. And it came to pass on the 7th day, that the child died. 2 Sam 12:15-18. Neither God nor David ever called this illegitimate child a son. I cannot help observing on this occasion, which is, that the adulterous offspring of David by Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah, begotten by David during the lifetime of Uriah, is mentioned 12 times in 8 verses, and is not once called a son, but the man-child. David, who, before he came to a sight and sense of his sin, might have called it so himself, but after he was awakened to a due sense of his iniquity, not all the torments which he endured while the child was sick, nor the news of its death, ever induced him to call it my son, but the man-child. How differently did he express himself on the news of the death of Absalom, 2 Sam. 18:33, and Sam. 19:4, where 8 times in 2 verses he repeats, O Absalom, my son, etc. I'll venture to suppose that, if David had been asked the cause of this distinction, we should have reason to think he saw a most important difference between a child begotten in adultery and a son begotten unborn under polygamy. Thelathora, Vol. 2:18-19. However, after that child was dead, then another was born in wedlock, Solomon, who later became the builder of a temple and the king of Israel. He became the mouth of the people in prayer and offered sacrifices in the temple at its dedication. His prayer to God was heard, and the house was so filled with God's glory that the priests could not stand to minister. I Kings 8:11. Thus, the child born in adultery was not considered a son, had no rights in Israel, and had to die. When Bathsheba and David were lawfully carried, then God acknowledged the union, and the child born of this legal marriage was called a son, and had the inheritance with all the rights of a son. God himself was the judge and administrator of the law, showing punishment for David's adultery, yet blessing his lawful polygamy. 5. Chastisement. The Lord chastised David by saying, I will take thy wives and give them unto thy neighbor before thine eyes. 2 Sam. 12:11. If polygamy were a sin, why would God take David's wives and give them to another, thus making a polygamist out of him if he wasn't one already? David's adultery was also a sin against his wives, so the Lord chastised David by taking them away from him. 6. Sin. The Lord said, David did that which was right in the eyes of the Lord, and turned not aside from anything that he commanded him all the days of his life, save only in the matter of Uriah the Hittite. I Kings 15:5. If David was doing that which was right all the days of his life, then his living polygamy was right in the eyes of God, but his dealing with Bathsheba and Uriah was a sin. 7. Inheritances. The civil law among the Jews was essentially a son who seeks an inheritance, or estate by succession, as a son, ought to prove his sonship. This was based somewhat on Deut. 23:2. The child born of David's adulterous intercourse with Bathsheba was not a son, that is, one who has the rights of lawful inheritances. It was for this reason that the child had to die, in spite of all of David's pleadings with the Lord for his life. He could not have title to the inheritances and the blessings, nor the scepter which the Messiah should receive in that line. If polygamy would have been considered a sin, equal to that of adultery, then his son Solomon would not have been able to receive that kingship from his father, nor to pass it on down through his seed either. Thus we see the tremendous difference between a child born in polygamy and one that is born in adultery. One has all the rights and privileges, the other none. There is no clearer illustration of the absolute difference between polygamy and adultery anywhere in the Bible than in this account of David, Bathsheba, and their children.